food to eat, whether they say they value honesty, whether somebody says they value, I don't know, they value a house. I mean, these are things they seek, or if you have them, you preserve them because they serve some function for your life. They further your existence in some manner.
Right.
And I think that would be enough because I know Rand says it's that which you act to preserve or keep, but I don't think that's quite, we would even quite think of that as a definition per se. It's more of like a description of what a value is or an aspect of a value. But it's not really so much about that it's you're acting to keep it. It's, I mean, that's something true about it. That if it is a value, you would naturally want to preserve it or act towards it. But it's at least a recognition that, or a belief that this thing in question will enhance your life or is something to further your standard of your living, whatever it might be.
So I guess actually maybe the issue is getting a much better grasp of what reason is. In my mind, it just stands as thinking using concepts. And so maybe that's where the issue is.
Yeah, do you have a hard time seeing it as a thing to preserve or act in regard to? You're just seeing it as just a tool, simply. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's more the nature of even your mind, just the nature of how the mind functions. A need to identify reality, a need to make logical conclusions about reality. It would be a value because it's not something that's a given. Reasoning doesn't happen merely by default. It's not like an apple falling from a tree. Like it doesn't matter what the apple thinks or does, or it's not so much about the apple as much as, I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. The apple will fall from the tree. It can't help but to fall. Like it's not like a choice. Like it would rather, I don't know, it seeks to be at the ground, or it desires to have, I don't know, seat on the ground or something. It wouldn't make sense because there's no consciousness. It doesn't have things to it can seek to preserve or anything like that. It has no means of changing what it's aware of because it's not aware of anything. But value is more like a looking at something in a certain way. Well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Reason would be just that the non-default of, it's not a default, it's something you have to focus your mind and do and attain and act with regard to. It's not going to happen automatically.
Right. And then with
But
the
reason is more
value
the
of power.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I don't know. Continue.
Reason by nature is just because you have to pick it. It's something like you have to act with regard to it or preserve it. It's something you have to recognize to act with regard to. It's not like, I don't know, you eat something, you digest it, and then nothing happens. I mean, it happens automatically. You wouldn't say, you're not really preserving digestion per se as much as, because there's no choice involved. There's no recognition. It just happens.
Okay. Um, and then the virtues are there because attaining reason or using reason, exercising that capacity for reason is not so straightforward. It's complicated in that it involves many aspects. For example, not taking concepts over from other people is the exercise of reason, but it's not self-evident. Is that the
It's
idea
not
that?
self. I would say so. It's not self-evident about those things. And even if we did know that fact, that it's a bad thing to do, you need, your mind needs to be able to integrate it and make use of it anyway. But that's why you have the concepts, because they condense the information so that you can keep that in mind. And because it's not
Okay.
self-evident. If it were self-evident, you might not even need a concept. You just see it and know it immediately. This is like, well, you see it and you need some way to condense all that information into something like a virtue or something like that. Otherwise, it would be too overwhelming. Like you would see thousands upon thousands of possibilities rather than any essentials or something like that.
And then with purpose as a value, when I look at that, uh, I just think, well, to just pick something doesn't seem that hard, to just pick a purpose. And that's why I'm confused. I'm like,
Right.
okay, that's a value, but what, how is a virtue helping you with purpose? Like you just pick a purpose.
Mm,
This is why I know I'm not getting it, because it just seems like obvious and okay, what do you do with this basically?
well, there's always a purpose in the sense of attaining or going towards some end. A
Right,
purpose, whatever the purpose might be.
right.
I mean, that has to be a cardinal value because, I mean, it's a way to determine even what is a value. I mean, if life is the standard of value, then you can decide, like, with that purpose in mind, I have other values are now possible. I mean, without that fundamental end purpose or absolute end goal, which Aristotle might see it as like your, I forget what term he would use, but it's a type of causation where it's like the ultimate goal of this entity. And that purpose is what enables human value. Unless we had a purpose, there's of some kind, value would be like a meaningless word.
Okay, so then the reason that you have the virtues is because understanding purpose in depth is difficult. Is that
That too, I mean, understanding purpose in terms of what general actions are necessary to that are in line with that purpose. If you have a purpose, you should act consistently with that purpose or
okay?
with regard to that purpose. So, I mean, having honesty could help you act with that purpose in mind, act with human nature in mind, how they're supposed to be used to help you attain that goal of living life.
And then self-esteem, I've understood as an emotion more than because how can you,
Yes.
if it is just a choice to esteem yourself, then what's the problem? You just say, I will eat food, I will take care of myself. It's just a thing you do. But it seems do you see self-esteem as an emotion? The evaluation of yourself is not how can you just go, I'm a human, my goal is to live and thrive, therefore I value myself, now I have self-esteem. That just seems wrong.
I would say it still is an, an emotion, but having that emotion, at least by Rand's theory, would imply um, specific ways of thinking about reality in the first place. Yeah, we could just say I have self-esteem and that's that, or you could say, oh, I'm doing well in life and therefore I have self-esteem. But I do think it's more emotional when it's used. I wish Rand would talk about it more. It's always about purpose
Okay,
and reason.
right.
Brandon talks plenty about self-esteem, and I haven't read his book on self-esteem, but it is something. Um, I do think it's emotional, and that recognition and feeling that um, you're a capable individual, that you're. It's hard to define because it's so emotion based. I mean, it's a recognition that you're a capable individual. You esteem yourself as able, and I think that would help support the idea that you have goals to go towards and reason to use. That not only do you need those things, but you're in fact able to use those things. or you're able to comprehend reason or the use of reason, and you're able to have a purpose and follow through. It's more like a psychological recognition that you are capable.
So a subconscious evaluation.
I would say so. Yes.
Because she does say you need to earn the right to hold yourself as your own highest value, which is self-esteem. And
right.
What would it mean to earn other than build up a record of victories, which your subconscious refers to and then uses for an evaluation? That's the only thing I can think of.
That's one of the main things I can think of too. Is that the only one? I mean, um, examples of overcoming it, yeah. I don't think you could really have. I mean, can you think of any other examples?
Can't.
I mean,
Apart from making the choice to go consciously, even if you have a negative evaluation of yourself, to make a conscious choice to think, I am my highest value. What specific action does it mean in this context? What specific thoughts? What should I think about? Like that, if you hold yourself as your highest value and you unravel that abstractly or philosophically, maybe there are tons of implications that you need to put in place, like automatic habits. And so you can do that with having a negative evaluation. So I guess there is a conscious component too, because in order to get self-esteem, I guess the claim would be the virtues of that conscious process to help you get to that point. That's my understanding.
yes, I would say so. I mean,
Okay.
that's like the consequence or results of following reason and purpose. Like they're intertwined. Like if you have self-esteem, then you use reason. You have purpose. If you have a purpose, then you esteem yourself as able to seek that purpose and the means to do so. Like they're all interconnected. That one does imply the other.
Yeah, it's strange because you need, like I was reading in the Brandon's book, you need self-esteem in order to be able to think efficiently, but then you need reason in order to have self-esteem. So you need to be able to think efficiently to have self-esteem. It's kind of a mess of um, what what comes first. Like,
I don't think
do you
any
know
of
what I'm?
one's first. I mean, you just do them all. I mean, I know that sounds a bit messy, but I think on some level it always will be. Because you can't just, yeah, like you're jumping into life and just doing what you can because a lot of things are happening at once. It's hard to isolate these things in life. And that's why we're not like all, and that's why lab scientists have experiments because they can control specifically, isolate things specifically that otherwise would be impossible. I don't think you can isolate these things in life. You can't like create an experimental situation where you divorce everything that could mean that's it, like make it only reason that you analyze. Like at some level, you're
Right.
going to be analyzing all of it. You couldn't take them
Right.
apart. They imply each other. They're even maybe they depend on each other conceptually. Almost like when we said like furniture, you see no habitation. I mean, they are connected. You can't understand furniture without also understanding somewhat what habitation is.
Okay. I think I know what part of my issue is here, which is when I look at these words, there's no specific vivid examples that come up. There is just abstract explanation, reason, the faculty that integrates, all that stuff. And then if I have that, then yeah, it's still floating. So it's not so obvious.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to go into this.
Yeah.
Okay. So in regards to consciousness, honesty consists in taking the process of cognition seriously. This requires that one reject any form of intellectual pretense, whether in relation to method, motive, or content.
Mm-hmm.
Is intellectual pretense a lie or what? And what would it be in, like, what would it lie in relation to method or motive? I sort of see, like, if you tell yourself you're doing something for some reason, but you're doing it for another, maybe it's kind of vague, but what's your take on this?
Seriously. I mean, it's hard to see. I mean, I know what he's saying, but it seems like a very sudden jump to go from one sentence to the next. I agree that it would require you have to reject any pretense or anything else but the truth. You only seek the truth. Um, I mean, if honesty is having a constant regard towards reality, recognizing the truth towards reality and seeking it out and identifying it, you can't use. You can't also sometimes use, well, I don't care about the truth. I only care about what I get in the end, or I don't care about what I get. I just feel like this is what I want to do, or like I don't care what the content of these facts are. Like I'm just gonna do whatever I want anyway. I mean, you could analyze life without being honest. Like you can't use those things because, well, simply put, you wouldn't be honest if you're not identifying things as they are, or trying to go by other motives other than the truth.
So what, I'm not sure if you said it because I may have missed it, but in relation to method, what would that be? Like a pretense in relation to
Um,
method?
I don't know, maybe just using your emotions as a way to decide, not any evaluation of the facts, but rather how the facts make you
Uh,
feel, for example. And
okay. So
that would
like
be a method. Yeah,
a
rationalization.
rationalization. Okay. Motive would be repression, and then content would obviously be the actual lie itself.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So he's like, don't fake it in terms of like you still want to seek out honesty in your method. You have to have valid reasons. Like, um, yeah, you don't want any pretense in motive. And the motive should be enhancing your life for honesty or enhancing and seeking more value.
Okay, so we continue reading. I honestly spliced up most of this chapter because there's so much that I can read through this. I'm like, all right, makes sense, but I wouldn't have a clue of what that actually means as far as application to my life. That's my experience so far in this chapter.
Yeah.
And so
Active
this
mind.
section, sorry.
I just think active mind. That's always
Yeah, in
important.
method, intellectual honesty means developing an active mind, as Ayn Rand puts it, knowing what one does know, constantly expanding one's knowledge, and never evading or failing to correct a contradiction. Uh, okay, we start with honesty is not faking reality, but then why do we start going into expanding one's knowledge and knowing what one does know? I'm confused because that just doesn't seem like what honesty is about. In my mind, faking reality is something you actively do, not something you do by mistake because you haven't expanded your knowledge. Like, I'm not following this view of honesty as being. Yeah, and now they go on to, so this is related. The man who defaults on this responsibility, who is satisfied with a policy of non-integration, whether in the form of mental stagnation or outright evasion, I think that's important, mental stagnation, is engaged in a pretense. How is stagnation a pretense? I'm just confused by why this is honesty, like not expanding your knowledge. And if you stagnate, why are you being dishonest? That's what I don't get.
Okay, well, let me just see an actual dictionary definition of pretense. I'm looking it up really quick. Pretense. A false appearance. Professed but feigned reason. An excuse. Um, Okay, well, to begin with, um, so why is honesty an active mind? I think what it's saying here, when he says the man who defaults on this responsibility was satisfied with the policy of non-integration. So it defaults on the responsibility to integrate. So he's talking about integration, and I think it would be to say that expanding your knowledge here means integration. It's not literally like an expansion, as in um, you've acquired more facts about reality, as much as you've recognized the need to integrate information. And integration would be an expansion of knowledge. Because once you've integrated something, you could say that you've acquired knowledge or increased your knowledge or something to that effect.
Okay.
So that would have to do with at least recognizing an epistemology that, or at least recognizing that you need to take into account the world around you, that you need to integrate more facts together as you learn things, or recognizing that reality is a changing thing, so you need to integrate information. So it would be saying that it's bad not to integrate, not so much that you committed the most evil sin ever if you fail to integrate, but that these things are necessary to be fully honest. You need a full sense of honesty, means even like the integration of all your facts, putting all that together. And mental stagnation would be going against that, or just non integration. If you just stagnate, you're not
Okay.
integrating.
So then, okay, maybe this is it. So it does say in method.
Yeah.
Intellectual honesty means developing an active mind. So what you're saying is that for me to be honest, I need to integrate.
Yes.
Otherwise, I constantly integrate.
Well, if you're integrating, as information comes in, you should integrate. That you should take into account what new information that comes in. That to be honest, you have to recognize those facts have changed, or something might change, and you have to, how do you deal with these new recognitions of reality? You have to integrate them with the rest of your knowledge. Like if you identify something as true, you need to see how that fits in also with the rest of what you think is true. You have to fit it all together. Otherwise, you're not completing your identification of what is true or not. You stopped halfway, say. You could say
Okay.
you don't want to stop halfway. You want to finish integrating or recognize that maybe you have to finish integrating later because there's not enough time right now or things like that. But it would be at least recognizing that you need to be active, you need to integrate in order to maintain intellectual honesty.
But I understand that that method of developing an active mind, meaning constantly seeking to integrate, would help you perceive reality more accurately. But I'm still unclear on why that, if you didn't do that, it would lead to dishonesty, because how I've understood dishonesty so far is faking reality. And so it's an active process, or a process of evasion, of turning away, and not one of a default on integration. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to emphasize here that it says intellectual honesty. So he might mean more specific, like the implications of your ideas. Or do you honestly understand what the words you're saying, what they mean? Do you honestly know the implications? Have you thought about the implications? Or are they just floating facts that are just there, that aren't actually integrated as true or false, just there? Like you want to be able to recognize what your ideas mean and recognize honestly that they have implications. Like if somebody says advocates for communism, like at least if they're intellectually honest, they'll acknowledge what communism does. They'll acknowledge they don't care about rights and things like that. That mean at least they would know the implications of their beliefs. They're saying what they are, understand what they are, and they're not evading the facts of what is in fact the case. So that's why we're focusing on intellectual honesty. At least given your ideas, what does it mean to say you're intellectually honest? So it would be to say like, I've as I've learned more about the world, I've integrated more things. As I've learned more about the world, I've identified the truth of these things and put it together appropriately, or recognize the facts of the matter. At least you can do that. You can say, at least you're trying to put things together. I think that would be the difference.
Although, if that's true, then you can be dishonest by default. So it's not an active process. Like, then if that would be the case, then I'm dishonest, as dishonesty characterizes me in that I haven't thought about my concepts, a lot of them, and um, what their reference are, what gives rise to them. I haven't reduced them, but that doesn't make sense, because there is some distinction to be made between someone who's not able to think well and doesn't integrate as a method versus someone who is telling a lie, for example. Like they seem like completely different things to me, and that's where I'm
Yes,
having trouble.
I agree.
And
We probably can say that, yes, there is a difference between maybe not knowing what the right methods are, therefore not knowing how to integrate. So it's not like you're being dishonest per se. I mean, I'm not sure honesty would really work as a word for that discussion. Like saying if you didn't integrate your concepts well enough is, I mean, leaving aside at least the cases where you put it aside for later. Just say that you had these concepts, you never integrated them in the past, and never planned to in the past. Like taking those into account, I wouldn't quite say you were being dishonest. I mean, we could say that you weren't recognizing reality as well as you should, or as well as you could if you knew the right principles, but it's not as if you were deliberately avoiding life entirely. We could say you made a mistake because you didn't know and haven't. The implications aren't as bad as if it were when you did know this stuff and just so decided not to follow it. I mean, you could have at least some level of honesty that you want to know the facts, but you just haven't learned the right method. So I wouldn't call that dishonesty as much as you haven't yet discovered what the best way to live life is. I think there's a clear difference when you're trying to live life as best you can and trying and everything you did with concepts before was your best effort. I wouldn't say that was dishonest. It would change to dishonesty once you were trying to deliberately not expand your knowledge or deliberately not think. You would at some level you would probably still thinking, maybe not efficiently, but I it would be doubtful that you were trying to literally fake reality. But maybe you were, I don't know. And it's hard to even judge that. It's more a matter of now that you know it's the case, or now that you know at least these are relevant questions, you can say, not only am I just acting in as best I can, but really by my nature, I'm trying to act as best I can. What is the nature of honesty? What is required of honesty? And I will try my best and recognize that. It's not like you're trying to not integrate by this point. Like you see the value of integration, so you try to do it. So at least you have an active mind in that sense.
where I agree. I'm still getting stuck on this though. The difference between, it seems like there is a massive distinction between stagnation and evasion.
Yeah.
Stagnation I interpret as not someone who's turning away, but just kind of not often exercising mental thought, but that evasion is knowing something there's something out there that you need to consider, but you don't, which I can see how that might be a form of dishonesty, because you're faking there's something out there in reality and now you're faking that it doesn't exist. But to then say mental stagnation is the same, that's where I'm confused on this, because, and the reason it's interesting is because it would have, if it's true that honesty is mental stagnation, then there's way more implications to this than just don't lie, right? So
Yes. There's more to it than
that,
don't lie. Correct.
that's where I'm at. Honestly, that's where I'm at. As in, like, I'm not fully clear on, but unraveling it is where it's then has applications. Just like independence suddenly now means to me
Mm-hmm.
not taking over concepts by default.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what don't you see? Like, how do you see this? What do you think about this idea that both mental stagnation and evasion are a pretense? What is the
Engaged in a
person who's
pretense.
stagnating pretending? Oops.
Trying to think if that, yeah, is it a pretense in that? Exactly. When you look, okay, is it a feigned reason or an excuse? Engage in an excuse. I mean, evasion, yes, would be a pretense in the way he's saying that you could say you believe you're pursuing something, but you're not. But you're not really, or you want to avoid the fact that you're not doing it right and denying that you're, even in the face of error, you still deny that it could be wrong. Mental stagnation, it's hard to say as much if that's necessarily a pretense. I mean, they don't believe they're pursuing anything. They just don't care. I don't think that's a pretense. I wouldn't say it's a pretense for anything. Like, what do they actually want? Or what, I mean, you might say, I don't need to integrate information. I don't need to integrate anything because that's all I need. It's hard to understand him here as a what he means exactly by pretense. It doesn't seem exactly the way Rand would want to even explain it. It's almost like psychologizing here. Like, is it pretense? Not necessarily. Is it good for your life? No. I mean, that much we can say these things are bad. Stagnation and evasion go against honesty. Do I want to say it's pretense? That's assuming too much, I think.
Okay. All right.
But you wouldn't want somebody who says like, oh, I'm a communist and I believe in it. But they said they believe in it, or maybe that's not a good example. Let's say, I'm trying to think of a good example. Yeah, you just want to pursue your knowledge in an actual honest way. Like, you want to pursue your knowledge and recognize what is required for it. Yeah, let's keep going. In regard to
I just
motive.
noticed. I just noticed now that in this part he writes rejects any form of intellectual pretense in relation to method, motive, or content, and this whole section is broken down into method, motive, and content. I just noticed that now.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got developing an active mind is the method of rejecting intellectual pretense, which we'll just go with maintaining honesty. I'm not sure about the pretense thing.
Yeah, don't worry about the pretenses. I don't think it's essential. So.
And the motive, okay, seeking knowledge because one needs it to act properly. Such a person intends to practice any idea he accepts as true. The alternative is the pretense of a hypocrite who fakes an interest in ideas. Yeah, so this is where I'm confused because suddenly I'm jumping to isn't this integrity? Like what are we talking about here? So motive means you seek knowledge because you need it to act properly. That's productivity. And then such a person intends to practice any idea he accepts as true. To me, I just think, isn't that just integrity? Like what that I got confused. Like, how is this anything to do with honesty?
Well, I think it's saying that if you're being honest, then you're also acting with integrity. But I'll take a step back. So in regard to motive for what? So, oh, in regard to motive for anything, your reason for acting, whatever reason for acting it is. Intellectual honesty means seeking knowledge, because the one needs it to act properly. Properly in this context would be your nature as a human, and for the goal of life. Like, what are the actions consistent with that? What are the actions necessary to live? So that's more the honesty part. And by
Sorry, could you repeat that? It's just gone
needed to act
in one.
properly for your life, to live your life as according to man's nature.
Okay.
And you
But
need
what
to know what
is,
the
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
So it's just act properly with life as the standard.
Mm-hmm.
Properly as in, what do you need as according to man's nature to live? And those would be the proper actions. So of course you need honesty. You need to identify facts in the world as it is to be able to attain that goal.
Okay.
And that would imply integrity, because not only are you trying to needed to act properly, but you have to practice what is true, practice um, what you learn is true. If it's true and it implied that you needed to, whatever the need might be, like you need to go hunting for a deer, like you can at least recognize that you're acting consistently with regard to what you identified as true. That you recognize that you need to live, you recognize that there's things you need to do to acquire your values. So you're acting with integrity if you identify all these facts and act with consistency to that.
Okay. I'm this is actually quite difficult. This whole section was difficult. All right. Let's see what in regard to content. What does it mean to fake a value? Like I get fake reality means represent something that isn't in reality, but so that would be a fact. But then what does it mean to
Yeah.
fake a value or a feel?
When field, I'm not sure that's unusual. A value would be, I don't know, just even proclaim that you tell somebody you love them, but you really don't. Like, because for whatever reason that might be, like, you want them to believe you love them because you
Oh,
want them to
okay.
live with you. It's more of a
Okay.
direct thing like that, like, or acting as if you care, but when you deny that you
Oh,
actually
so
don't
that
care.
okay. I sort of see like pretending someone is a value to you, but not really feeling that.
Yeah, and I think it could have even personal things like, oh, I've read like 80 pages of this book out of 300. It's really boring. I don't value it, but I got so far, so I'm just going to read it anyway. You're almost like denying to yourself that you don't get any value out of the book. You're pretending to yourself as if you care, but you probably don't.
Right.
I mean, I've
Okay,
probably
that's
done that
interesting.
sometimes.
I do
Like,
that a lot. That's interesting.
yeah, I think that would be
Yeah.
part about honesty too. Just recognize what is the case. Like, it's not helping you, it's not
Ah,
benefiting you, and you could say, oh,
see, that's interesting though.
honest.
That's not something I wouldn't have thought of. Like that's what I'm looking for, those kind of examples. Because now suddenly I'm like, okay, now I see if I have a feeling that I'm really not enjoying this or gaining anything, why am I pushing through it? And then to be honest would be to recognize that I'm not gaining anything from it. But I didn't even think of that as an example. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm sure there's probably tons more examples like that, right? That might not be so obvious or
Yeah,
self-evident.
Yeah, usually some form of rationalization. Like what I gave you was an example of like rationalization. Well, I read so much of the book, so I'm just going to finish it. Well, that's a rationalization. It's not like, it's almost like a denial of things.
Right. Or like a movie, you're in a movie and you're like 20 minutes in and you're like, oh, this is shit and it's not going anywhere, but I've already paid for the ticket. And
Yeah.
so I'm just going to sit through the whole movie.
Like it could be lying to yourself in the sense of you don't want to admit you wasted your money. It's like, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, well, I'm out of here. Like, I think people sometimes do that just as a way to pretend, like, almost lie to themselves. Like, no, I didn't waste my money. I'm going to make the most out of my money. Like, no, you already wasted it. Like, you can't get more value of it. You're only going to get less value the more you stay.
That's really interesting. That see suddenly the application of this virtue becomes interesting because it's those ideas, those concrete situations that I don't think about, and suddenly I can think about them in terms of honesty. So I'm not fully clear on your because you I guess you're being honest. You're saying, well, I paid for it. Now I want to get my value's worth out of the movie. And even if it's crap, I don't want to, I don't know. It's tricky when you say that, right? If you say, I don't want to waste my money. So you sit there and watch the rest of the movie. What part of that is dishonest? What part of that is faking reality?
It could be, I mean, of course, it depends on so much of the context, but you would want to ask things like, um, why is this movie important? What would I be doing otherwise? Maybe might be another question, or it might be that um, yeah, just more things like that, or recognizing that, um, or even recognize why did you go see the movie? Like it was just to hang out with somebody. You might just say, "Oh, it's terrible," but I'll stay and hang out with my best friend because he likes it, or it's cool, or something like that. I mean, I've sat through movies I hated, but more like just because it was fun being with the person I was with. So it wasn't like an invasion there. I wasn't pretending like I'm not trying to rationalize it. Like I genuinely went to be with the person. I
Right.
didn't go just to see the movie.